Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
I'm a seeker and person who's doing a lot spiritually, but I seek around all over the place. So what is this?
This is a community that is practicing in two related traditions. The main tradition is called Trika Shaivism or Kashmir Shaivism. It's from Northwest India. And then the secondary tradition is Dzogchen, pretty much the same genre of tradition, which is called a direct realization tradition. And that means that there's an assumption that using your own senses and your mind as a sense organ, that you can discover for yourself what is going on here, what reality is, what the self is, that you can perceive that directly. And so the whole arc of the seated practices that we do and other practices is to basically clear away or destroy perceptual impediments to you seeing for yourself what's really happening here and who you really are. Kashmir Shaivism or Trika Shaivism is part of the tantric traditions of India, and Dzogchen is nominally Buddhist. They're both oppositional traditions in the sense that they were more egalitarian than other traditions in their countries, having women teachers and people of different castes and etc. practicing, and having a view that really doesn't require belief of any sort. It doesn't really require faith. It's more based on seeing how things actually are and the natural arising of devotion. The teachings can be a little more fierce. It's a little more confrontational than some other traditions where you just sit around for years and meditate and no one bothers you. So that's not for everybody, but the relationship with the teacher could be a little more rough and tumble. One thing that's specific to this community is that it's focused on doing seated practice. This is a little more traditional, which you could just come and drink tea and show up and not do any practice, that's fine. But if you decided you really wanted to study with me, then you would be asked to do a good amount of seated practice.
Can you talk about devotion to a form versus the formless?
Well, the form and the formless are the same. It's just a matter of what attracts us. And for most people, some form is needed and appreciated and enjoyed, not just needed in the utilitarian sense. There's really no difference. Our conception of the formless is as contrived as anything else. So in the end, there's just this livingness, and whether it appears in a form or whether we're just relating to it in some other way, it makes no difference whatsoever. But in the beginning, you need to be magnetized. You need to have something to open the doors and the gates for you. And usually that is something with form. You could have form and formless or more abstract on your altar at the same time. Just don't have a hierarchical approach to it. It's all the same thing.
I have kind of a related question about non-hierarchicalness and like up and down. And I was thinking the other day with the practice of Ma above our heads and like breathing into our central channel from that, and that it's not like Ma is in the ground and we're breathing up from our feet. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that we do a lot of practices where gods or beings are above and we breathe them in, but up's not better than down. And I just had some sort of question about that.
Well, we live vertically,
yeah,
for the most part,
mm-hmm.
and our channels reflect that. So it's more of like an anatomy. And there's something about an image of Ma, of an avatar, is an incarnation that's more expansive and subtle than we are. So it could just indicate more subtlety and more access to wisdom. But we're all made of the same thing. That's the difference. In a more transcendental tradition, it would be, well, of course, they're better than we are. They're just better. And that would be, even in a lot of traditions that call themselves non-dual, they still have this attitude that something is higher or better or something or other. These are all relative ways of experiencing things. The idea is we want to recover from that. And we want to discover that we are of the same essence as even the most rarefied being. Doesn't mean we have the same access to wisdom, and we're not embodied in the same way, but we are made of the same enlightened essence nature in full measure. The thing with the deities above our head is that we have on the top of our head that soft spot, and that is an opening to our central channel. It's called Brahmarandra, which I'm sure you remember. The central channel of Ma is continuous with ours. And so it's indicating something is being shared with us, but it's only what we already are. There's no sense that we're missing something. We're having an experience of missing something. And so now we're being given all of these experiences of getting what we're missing. But in the end, we're going to discover that we weren't missing it ever anyway. We go through all this to discover that we already were the thing that we thought we were missing. Perfect from the beginning. That's what this means. Perfect from the beginning means you already are perfectly enlightened essence nature. You have just forgotten that, and you need to relearn it. And these are all the tools that we have for relearning that.
Just curious, your thoughts on translation. What's lost in my own need to translate into something that I can understand more, resonate with?
First of all, the idea of translation in Tibet and really a lot in India, it's just a very loose idea of translation. And having wildly different versions of things is not considered wrong. It's fine. That being said, just as a person who's read a lot of things in translation, what the crux of it is how much realization does somebody have? That's what's going to make you understand mantric language. Something like the Song of the Vajra is how much realization you have, how much insight, how much direct insight you have into what the import of these words is. And you might be able to say it in a number of different ways, but if you don't have a level of realization, then your translation is never going to be good. I'll give you an example of the Song of the Vajra. I can find it again quickly. I've sourced this both from Rinpoche's translation and from somebody else's translation. And I looked at somebody else's translation first, and they translated this line as blissful Dharma, sublime and unmoving. And I thought to myself, that's not correct. This is not correct. First of all, it isn't unmoving. Living presence isn't unmoving. So this must be an incorrect translation. And I looked at Rinpoche's translation. It didn't say anything like that. I have a book that he wrote about the Song of the Vajra and the different sections of it. And in the section related to this statement, he said that the word that is in Tibetan means movement beyond moving. What that meant was that there's always movement happening, but we're not conditioned by it in the same way that we would be by ordinary movement. So all of us, we do different things and we're conditioned by the things that happen and how we move through the world, or it expresses our conditioning. But if you're more realized, you're moving through the world, but you're not conditioned by it. So it's movement beyond moving, or moving beyond movement. I don't think it matters which way you say it, but in no way does it mean unmoving, in no sense. But the person who translated this, I have no idea why they translated it this way. I could say on the one hand, they're a student of Dzogchen. Clearly from the translation, I can tell they're a student of Dzogchen, and maybe even a student of Rinpoche's, I'm not sure. There was a couple little phrases in here that made me think that, just characteristic language that he used. But that's like an instance where somebody wrote something that's sort of like dharmic cliche, that the ultimate is unmoving in some way, or even unmoved. This is like a cliche. in Buddhist and Hindu traditions. And whatever limited contact I have with living presence, I can tell you it is not unmoving or unmoved, neither. But what Rinpoche explains, it's always full of movement, but that movement is not an expression of being conditioned, or nor is it conditioning. It doesn't create limitation. It's not expressive of limitation. So it's a different kind of movement, an unconditioned movement. Only someone who hasn't had a certain level of contact with living presence would say anything like that, would translate it like that. So that's really the crux of the matter to me, is how much realization does somebody have? Do they actually know firsthand what's being talked about? And then you can translate really, really well. Or you can do a literal translation, which very rarely happens. I mean, literal translations are just almost never available. I always give this example of unconditionedness. I studied Alexander technique for a while, and my teacher gave me this book that had a picture of a man holding a toddler, or maybe like a 6-month-old baby. I don't know, maybe younger, I'm not sure. But this man had really big hands, and he was holding this baby. Baby was sitting upright. You know how babies just sit in this unbelievably beautiful posture? So the baby was like sitting in this guy's hand, and the baby was sort of like poised like this in the air and just like completely relaxed. You got the feeling that the baby could just move in any direction. Like the baby was so supple and unconditioned by whatever life was going to happen next. It could move 360 degrees with equal ease and be completely fine and feel completely relaxed being held this way. So this is an example of being less conditioned. Whereas if you or I were in that position, we'd be like, oh my God, and we'd be fearful and scrambling to go in a particular direction, like down. And, and that's an example of conditioning. When we want to go in a certain direction, or we want to move in a certain way, we want to speak in a certain way, we want to feel a certain way, we want to go towards a certain goal, because we are conditioned to think that's the right way, the best way, or the only good way to go. That is an expression of limited movement or karmically impacted movement or karma. What we want to be able to do is to be in the circumstances of life with our senses wide open, just feeling the whole circumstance that we're immersed in and responding to it spontaneously without any conceptual impediments or habits standing in our way. So even if this direction is best, given the circumstance that we're in, we want to have been able to move in any direction. We don't want to be compelled to go in this direction. We want this direction to be a skillful, spontaneous response to our real circumstance, not a karmically bound response that says this direction's always the best. That we anticipate all kinds of things based on our karmas. And we move in certain ways and make certain choices based on our anticipation of how things are going to be. This is imprisonment. We want to just be in our circumstance, immersed in living presence, feeling, perceiving with clarity, and responding in a spontaneous way. That spontaneous way may have a lot of precision to it. It's not like, well, I could do this or I could do that. It's not like that. We're responding with instantaneous precision to a circumstance, but we're not bound to do that habitually. I don't know how I got off on that, but anyway, translation. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.